I never meant to stare, but in that moment when our eyes met across the beach, everything changed between us. My name is Donald Parker, and this is how one embarrassing moment with my boss turned my life upside down. The summer sun was very strong on the Chicago shoreline. I spent most of the morning trying to keep up with my 7-year-old daughter, Beverly. Being a single father for the last 3 years was a constant test of my energy. It was much harder than my professional life as the head of logistics at Austin Media. In my job, I was responsible for moving cargo and managing complex schedules. On the beach, I was just a tired dad trying to make sure his daughter didn't get a sunburn. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. It reminds us that hope and second chances are universal languages. Beverly was busy building what she called a fortress in the sand. It was really just a messy pile of wet dirt, but I told her it was a masterpiece. I was thankful for this rare Saturday off. Usually, my weekends were filled with emails about shipping delays or warehouse problems. My boss, Maria K. Alston, was a woman who lived for her work. She was 35, incredibly successful and very intimidating. People at the office called her the Ice Queen because she was always serious and never shared anything about her private life. I respected her talent, but I lived in fear of her high expectations. While I was fixing our beach umbrella, a strong wind blew across the sand. A woman was sitting on a towel just a few yards away. I realized with shock that it was Maria. She was wearing a bright red wrap and looking out at the water. She looked much softer than she did in her expensive business suits. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind caught her red wrap and pulled it away from her body. For several seconds, Maria was completely exposed. Because I was looking toward her to fix my umbrella, I saw everything. I couldn't look away fast enough. At that exact moment, she turned her head. Our eyes locked in a moment of pure, silent horror. My heart felt like it stopped beating. I quickly looked down at the sand, feeling my face burn with shame. I was certain that this accident would cost me my career. I spent the next several minutes imagining how I would tell Beverly that I no longer had a job. But Maria did not act like the Ice Queen I knew from the office. After she covered herself back up, she did something I never expected. She walked over to our towel. She didn't look angry or ready to fire me. She looked like a woman who had decided to drop her guard. She acknowledged the accident with a small, tired nod, telling me that the wind was the only thing in charge today. Instead of leaving, she stayed. She sat down in the sand right next to Beverly. She didn't care that her red wrap was getting dirty. She started helping Beverly with the sandcastle. She told us that she knew exactly how hard it was to be a single parent because she had been raised by one. Her father had worked multiple jobs just to provide for her, much like I was doing now. We sat there for a long time. We didn't talk like a boss and an employee. We talked like two people who were both tired of being perfect all the time. She shared a peanut butter sandwich with Beverly and told me about her own childhood struggles. I realized that her cold personality at work was just a mask she used to survive in a tough corporate world. Inside, she was a person who valued family and hard work just as much as I did. She even admitted that she had been watching how I handled Beverly. She told me she was impressed by my patience. She said that managing a child was the ultimate form of logistics. By the time the sun began to set, the fear I felt earlier was completely gone. The accidental moment of seeing her topless had been a shock, but it had also broken a wall between us. As we walked to our cars, Maria told me to take the next Monday morning off. She wanted to spend more time with Beverly instead of worrying about the office. I realized that I wasn't just another name on a payroll list anymore. We had shared a real human connection. The wind had taken away her clothes for a moment, but it had also taken away the distance between our lives. I drove home feeling like a new man, knowing that a simple accident at the beach had just opened a brand new door for my future. Monday morning arrived with a heavy sense of dread that followed me from the moment I woke up until I reached the revolving glass doors of Alston Media. Usually, my morning routine with Beverly was a blur of mismatched socks and toasted waffles. But that day, every movement felt slow and weighted by anxiety. My name is Donald Parker, and as I walked toward my desk in the logistics department, I felt like a man walking toward his own professional execution. The events of Saturday afternoon at the beach played on a continuous loop in my mind. I could still feel the heat of the sun, hear the sound of the wind, and most importantly, see the look of pure shock on Maria Kay. Alston's face when our eyes met during her most vulnerable moment. In the corporate world of Chicago, Maria was known as a woman who never made mistakes and never showed weakness. She was the Ice Queen, a title she had earned by being the most disciplined and demanding CEO in the industry. As the head of logistics, I knew better than anyone that Maria valued order above all else. Seeing her exposed on a beach towel was the ultimate disruption of that order. I was convinced that she would want to erase the memory of that afternoon by erasing me from her payroll. I braced myself for a cold, formal meeting with HR or a short, sharp email telling me to pack my belongings. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen without actually seeing the shipping manifest, waiting for the axe to fall. However, when I finally looked down at my workspace, I realized that something was different. Sitting next to my keyboard was a small, delicate package wrapped in simple white paper. With trembling hands, I opened it to find a tiny, expertly crafted glass sandcastle. It was beautiful, catching the harsh office fluorescent lights and turning them into something soft and shimmering. Tucked underneath the glass base was a small card with a single sentence written in Maria's sharp, elegant handwriting. Some structures are worth building carefully. It was signed simply with the letter V. For Victoria, the name she had told me to use at the beach. Looked up toward her corner office and saw her standing by the glass door. She didn't call me in or offer a long explanation. She simply gave me a quiet, respectful nod before turning back to her computer. In that one gesture, the crushing weight of my fear evaporated. She wasn't going to fire me. In fact, she was acknowledging that the fortress we had started to build in the sand with Beverly was something she wanted to protect. As the week progressed, the atmosphere in the entire office began to shift in ways that left the rest of the staff whispering in the break rooms. The changes were subtle at first, but for someone like me who lived in the details of logistics, they were monumental. Maria, who used a demand that all senior staff stay until at least 7 in the evening, suddenly issued a company-wide memo regarding a new Family First initiative. She announced that effective immediately, the core office hours would shift to allow parents to be home for dinner and school activities. Our weekly operations briefings, which had traditionally been held at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoons, were moved to 3 o'clock on Thursdays. The Ice Queen was beginning to melt, and the heat from that change was felt by everyone. I watched Maria closely during our professional interactions. She was still the brilliant, driven leader she had always been, but the sharp edges of her personality had been sanded down. When we sat in meetings to discuss supply chain disruptions or warehouse costs, she no longer looked at us as mere tools to achieve a goal. She started asking about our lives. During one particularly stressful afternoon when a shipment of high-end displays was delayed at the port, she didn't erupt in anger as she usually would. Instead, she called me into her office, offered me a chair, and asked how Beverly was doing. She remembered that Beverly had been struggling with a cold, a detail I had mentioned only in passing at the beach. I realized that the woman who had spent years building a wall around her heart was finally learning how to let people in. The most significant change happened when Beverly came down with a high fever and a nasty bout of the flu. In the past, I would have been terrified to call out of work. I would have spent my day at home hunched over a laptop, feeling guilty that I wasn't at my desk and guilty that I wasn't giving my daughter my full attention. But when I sent a brief message to Maria explaining the situation, her response was immediate and startling. She told me to turn off my phone and focus entirely on Beverly. She informed me that she would personally oversee the logistics team for the next 3 days, and that my only assignment was to make sure my daughter felt better. I sat on the edge of Beverly's bed, holding a cool washcloth to her forehead, and felt a level of loyalty to Maria that I had never felt for any boss in my life. She wasn't just my employer anymore. She was someone who understood the invisible labor of being a single parent. When I finally returned to the office, Maria stopped by my desk late in the evening. The office was quiet, and the city lights of Chicago were beginning to twinkle through the windows. She looked different than she had a month ago. Her hair wasn't pulled back in a tight, restrictive bun. It fell in the same loose, cascading curls I had seen at the beach. Her clothing, while still professional, was less like armor and more like a reflection of her true self. She admitted to me that she had spent her whole life thinking that being a leader meant being unreachable. She told me that watching me with Beverly at the beach had made her realize she was missing the very balance she often preached about in marketing meetings. She confessed that she was tired of being the ice queen and was trying to learn how to be a human being again. I told her that she was doing a better job than she realized. I explained that the morale in the office was at an all-time high because the staff no longer felt like they had to choose between their careers and their families. We talked for over an hour, not about shipping routes or profit margins, but about the difficulty of finding a rhythm in a world that never stops moving. It was during this conversation that she mentioned the upcoming company picnic. In the past, these events were stiff, formal affairs where everyone was too afraid to relax. But Maria told me she wanted this year to be different. She wanted it to be a celebration of families. She looked me in the eye and asked if Beverly and I would be there. The way she asked wasn't a corporate command. It was a personal request. There was a softness in her gaze that matched the reference image I kept in my mind that afternoon by the water. I realized that the accidental glance at the beach hadn't just revealed her body. It had revealed her soul. It had forced both of us to stop pretending. As I gathered my things to head home that night, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I was no longer just a man managing logistics. I was a man who had helped a powerful woman find her way back to herself. The logistics of the heart were far more complicated than any shipping schedule. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We were building a new foundation, one that was much stronger than the lopsided sandcastles we had made on the shore. The week ended with a sense of anticipation. Monday was no longer a day to be feared, but a day to be embraced. I drove home to Beverly, realizing that the most embarrassing moment of my life had turned into a catalyst for a total transformation. I wasn't just working for a CEO anymore. I was growing alongside a woman who was finally brave enough to show her heart to the world. Listen, if you've made it this far in the story, you're invested. You want to know what happens to them. But here's the thing. Most people scroll past these stories without subscribing. They watch, they enjoy, and they disappear. If this story matters to you, if you actually care how it ends, hit that subscribe button, please. It takes 2 seconds. And if you don't, you'll probably forget about this channel and never. The company picnic was held at a large, sprawling park overlooking the same Great Lake that had served as a backdrop for our first fateful encounter. As I pulled into the parking lot with Beverly, my heart was doing a nervous dance against my ribs. In my professional life, I was used to managing thousands of moving parts, but the logistics of seeing my CEO in a social setting, while surrounded by my inquisitive co-workers, felt like a puzzle I hadn't quite solved. I worried about how Maria would act. Would she return to the Ice Queen persona to maintain her authority, or would the softness we found in the sand stay with us? When we stepped onto the grass, the first thing I noticed was a change in the air. The usual stiff corporate tension that followed Alston media events had been replaced by the smell of charcoal and the sound of children laughing. Then I saw Maria. She wasn't standing in a roped-off executive area or holding a clipboard. She was wearing a simple, flowing sundress that caught the breeze, her golden curls cascading over her shoulders just like they had at the beach. When she saw us, her face lit up with a genuine smile that reached her eyes, a look that used to be a rare miracle in the office. Beverly, who didn't understand the complex rules of corporate hierarchy, ran straight toward her. "Maria, look at my new shoes," she shouted. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company crouch down on the grass, completely ignoring the grass stains on her dress, to inspect a pair of light-up sneakers. Maria didn't just give a polite nod. She engaged with Beverly as if she were the most important person at the picnic. It was a clear sign to everyone watching that the old rules no longer applied. The afternoon was a blur of moments that shattered every expectation I had. Maria joined the logistics team for a game of touch football, and seeing her dive for a pass in the grass left the entire warehouse staff in a state of shock. She wasn't just participating. She was having fun. She took the time to speak with every employee, asking about their families and their lives outside of work. The whispered nicknames like Ice Queen were replaced by a new kind of quiet respect. People weren't afraid of her anymore. They were inspired by her. Later, as the activity slowed down, Maria and I found ourselves sitting on a wooden bench near the lakefront while Beverly played tag with the other children. The conversation was easy and natural, stripped of the sir and ma'am formalities of the boardroom. Maria admitted to me that for years, she had felt like a prisoner of her own success. She had believed that if she showed even an ounce of humanity, she would be seen as weak or incompetent. She confessed that seeing me at the beach, seeing a man who was both a professional leader and a devoted, messy, sand-covered father, had been the wake-up call she didn't know she needed. I told her that in logistics, we often focus so much on the destination that we forget to check the condition of the vehicle. I realized that Maria had been running on empty for a long time, and our accidental encounter had been the emergency stop that saved her. She reached out and rested her hand on mine, and for the first time, I didn't worry about who was watching. The connection between us was no longer about a topless accident or a professional secret. It was about two people who had found a sense of peace in each other's presence. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and violet, the atmosphere became even more intimate. Maria spoke about her father again, describing the quiet sacrifices he made so she could one day lead a company like Alston Media. She realized that by being so cold and distant, she was actually dishonoring the very values of hard work and family that her father had instilled in her. She looked at me and told me that I had taught her more about leadership in one afternoon on a beach towel than she had learned in a decade of business school. By the end of the evening, as we helped the staff pack up the remaining supplies, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that the culture of the company had changed forever. But more importantly, the culture of my own life had changed. I wasn't just a single dad struggling to keep his head above water, and I wasn't just a logistics manager hiding in the background. I was a man who was finally allowing himself to be seen, and I was doing it alongside a woman who was brave enough to do the same. As I walked Beverly back to the car, Maria walked with us. The three of us looked like a family, a thought that brought a lump to my throat. Maria thanked me for coming, but the way she said it meant so much more than a simple goodbye. She was thanking me for the sandcastles, for the peanut butter sandwiches, and for the courage to look at her as a woman instead of a boss. Driving home that night, the city of Chicago looked brighter than usual. The logistics of my heart were finally in order. I knew that the logistics of love required constant work and a willingness to be vulnerable. But for the first time, I had a partner who was willing to build that structure with me. The beach trip had been the inciting incident. The picnic had been the climax of our transition. And as Beverly fell asleep in the back seat, I knew that the next chapter of our lives was going to be the most beautiful one yet. 6 months had passed since that life-changing day at the lake, and the landscape of my world had been completely redesigned. I was no longer just a head of logistics at Alston Media, focused on shipping lanes and delivery windows. I was a man who had successfully navigated the most complex transition of my life. My name is Donald Parker, and as I walk along that same stretch of sand where our story began, I realize that sometimes the most embarrassing moments are actually the most necessary ones. Beside me, Maria walked with a grace that no longer felt like a shield, but like a genuine expression of her happiness. Ahead of us, Beverly was already running toward the water, her laughter carrying on the same wind that had once threatened to ruin my career. The professional transformation at Austin Media had become a case study in the industry. The Ice Queen persona was a distant memory, replaced by a leader who understood that empathy was the ultimate logistical advantage. Maria had followed through on every promise she made at the beach and the picnic. We had implemented flexible work structures that allowed every employee to be a present parent or a balanced individual, and as a result, the company was more profitable and efficient than ever before. But the most significant change wasn't in the company's bottom line. It was in the way Maria and I looked at each other across the breakfast table every morning. Our relationship had grown with the same careful attention she had noted on that first glass sandcastle gift. We had spent the last half year learning the logistics of a blended life. It wasn't always easy. There were schedules to coordinate, Beverly's school plays to attend, and the natural growing pains of two independent people learning to rely on one another. However, every challenge was met with a new kind of transparency. We no longer had to hide behind corporate titles or masks of perfection. The day the wind blew away Maria's rap was the day we both stopped pretending we had everything figured out, and that honesty had become the foundation of our love. As we reached the spot where we had shared that first peanut butter and jelly sandwich, Beverly stopped and began to dig into the sand with familiar intensity. She looked up at us, her face glowing with the late afternoon sun, and called for us to hurry. She wanted to build a mega fortress today, one that could hold the whole world inside. Maria looked at me, her cascading curls caught in the breeze, and I saw in her eyes a reflection of the reference image I had carried in my heart for months, the image of a woman who was finally free to be herself. We knelt in the sand together, our shoulders brushing as we worked on Beverly's ambitious project. As I packed wet sand into a plastic bucket, I thought about how much I had feared this place 6 months ago. I had been so worried about the embarrassing moment and the accidental glance that I almost missed the miracle it created. I realized that Maria hadn't just been my boss who caught me staring. She was a partner who had been waiting for someone to see her as a human being. My single dad expertise hadn't just helped her find balance. It had given us both a second chance at a family. The sun began to set over the Chicago skyline, casting long, golden shadows across the beach. Maria reached out and caught my hand, her fingers interlocking with mine, sandy and warm. She told me quietly that she was grateful for the wind that day, grateful for the chaos that forced us out of our rigid boxes and onto the sand. I agreed, realizing that the most important project I would ever manage wasn't shipping route or a warehouse move. It was the life we were building right here, one bucket of sand at a time. As we stood up to walk back to the car, Beverly running between us and holding both our hands, the story reached its resolution. We were no longer a single father and a lonely CEO. We were a family that had been built from the ruins of a corporate wall. The wind still blew, but now it felt like a welcome friend, a reminder that the most beautiful love stories often begin with the most awkward first chapters. We drove home together, knowing that our final blueprint wasn't just about business or logistics. It was about the beautiful, messy, and perfect balance of a life shared. This story teaches us that true leadership and professional success are not built on rigid hierarchies or cold authority, but on the foundation of radical empathy and shared vulnerability. By stripping away corporate titles, quite literally through an accidental moment of exposure, the characters demonstrate that the most effective logistics in life involve balancing high-stakes responsibility with the raw, human needs of family and emotional well-being. Ultimately, it illustrates that when we stop hiding behind masks of perfection and acknowledge our mutual struggles, we create a more loyal, efficient, and resilient community where people aren't just managed but truly seen. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. Kindly support what I do here by subscribing. And then drop in the comment section if you would like part 2. What challenges will they face as a new blended family? Let me know if you want to hear more.